Welcome to a This Week in South Carolina special report. I'm Gavin Jackson. Over the span of several days of steady rainfall in early October 2015, rainfall records were shattered from the coast to the Midlands that led to nearly 50 dams failing, rivers, neighborhoods, and roads flooding, 1,500 water rescues, tens of thousands of people displaced, disruption to the Columbia water system, and hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, as well as 19 lives lost in what is known as the 1,000-year flood. It was a distressing time, especially in the Midlands and the city of Columbia, which was pummeled with rain. In this episode, we look back at the disaster, speak with the people closest to it, and the changes that have been made to make areas more resilient in the face of changing climate threats. I want to start us off by talking to a familiar voice, South Carolina Public Radio's George Kearns. He and several others at SCETV were stuck in the office for days as nearby roads were flooded. He and others maintained operations and critical communications during that time, and he remained on the radio throughout the disaster, reporting the latest. Here's part of his morning report from October 3rd, 2015.
Good morning. I'm George Kearns with a special weather statement for South Carolina Public Radio. A huge rainfall event is about to begin in South Carolina. The latest projections have more than 10 inches of rain accumulating in Charleston, more than 10 inches as well in Orangeburg, as much as 17 inches in some parts of the Midlands, and anywhere from 4 to 8 inches of additional rain in the upstate. Governor Haley is imploring you to please be careful.
This is a time we need you to be prepared. This is a time that we need you to take care of your family. Know where your kids are going to be. They need to be at home. Don't plan on going any places that you don't have to go.
More updates throughout the day. Stay tuned to South Carolina Public Radio.
John Godfrey and I came in expecting to be here all day, and then at the end of the day, we thought we'd be going home, not realizing all the roads around the studios were shut down. We were here. That was it. And I showed up early on a Saturday morning and finally got home at about noon on Tuesday. Again, John and I lived on Diet Pepsi and peanut butter crackers for 3.5 days. And, you know, we laugh about it now, but we were none too happy about it by that Tuesday morning. It was hard because we didn't have the boots on the ground that we would typically have covering a news story like this because our reporters couldn't get out either. So John and I depended on phone calls. You know, EMD was great. They've always been great with us. The National Weather Service, both in Columbia, Charleston, and in Wilmington. We talked to all of them. We had the content available. We just had to work a little harder for it.
And then, George, to that, when you look back and you think about what you covered and just how intense that story was, I mean, something that 1,000-year flood, words that we don't usually say right. In a given year. We say hurricanes, we say floods, but we don't say 1,000-year flood. What was it like to see that kind of devastation and to report on that level of devastation? You know,
I tell you, it's kind of surreal. My most vivid memory came after the weekend. You know, once I had gone home after the coverage was hectic. You know, we were just going all day, all night. So not a lot really stood out. It was just more of the same. On the Wednesday, coming back into work for Wednesday morning news, I'm driving through downtown Columbia at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was almost dystopian. You know, I was on the road alone, except for dump trucks and trailers hauling bulldozers and trucks and trailers full of sandbags. And a lot of things were shut down, and vacant lots had been turned into sandbag stations because I had to go by the Columbia Canal, which suffered its share of damage. And it was really very surreal, very grim. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I remember the most. It was a very bizarre drive through downtown Columbia.
And then just kind of wrapping up, George, when you still see, it's been 10 years later, you see how we've changed as a city. Anything maybe stick out to you as a reminder of those days when you drive by something or you see something, you think back?
It upsets so many people's day-to-day routine, not just for that weekend, but literally for years afterwards. So hopefully we've learned a little bit of a lesson. I mean, like you say, we can't plan on a 1,000-year flood, but should anything like this, we still get plenty of storms. We still have hurricanes to deal with.
It kind of made me think really quick, just If there's a point during all this when you were here Saturday to Tuesday, where you're like, okay, what more is going to happen, right? You're talking about the dams flooding and going over their supports, and sometimes completely falling apart too. You have this never-ending rain happening. Then you have the dams failing. I mean, did it ever seem like the rivers going up and cresting and flooding? Did it ever seem like it wasn't going to stop, or were you trying to stay as cool as possible in these situations?
It really did. I mean, I wasn't able to get outside of the studios too much, but the few times I did, we've seen heavy rain all across this state. Some of those summer storms come down in buckets. That weekend wasn't like that. It was a moderate rain, but it just didn't stop. It just kept going day and night. And you're right. You stand out back and you look around, and there's no cars on the road, and some of the lights are out, and it's just constant rain. And then you walk around 2 or 3 hours later, it's the exact same, and it gets it was a little frightening for a while. You got to wonder to yourself, just what's going on, and when is this going to stop? Luckily, 3.5 days later, it finally let up.
The Midlands, and specifically the city of Columbia, experienced the worst damage from the flood, with the steady rain swelling waterways and lakes that have never seen such rain. Rivers and creeks overran their banks, and dams failed, leading to catastrophic and deadly flooding in areas that typically don't see such activity. And on top of that, the Columbia Canal, which supplies the capital city's drinking water supply, suffered a breach. Columbia City Manager Teresa Wilson, along with then Mayor Steve Benjamin, led the immediate response with emergency officials. And the work to fully restore and safeguard the canal continues today, amid ongoing tests like Hurricane Helene last year. So you're planning for the worst, like everyone does, but I mean, did the worst kind of come true?
The worst definitely came true, probably and then some, because we really, you think about first responders and the roles we play, and we also have our own families, that we had to, I remember, never forget, fortunately, at that time I lived very close to my parents down the street, and I had my daughter, who's 22 now, I think she was 11 at the time, and so I just remember that morning when I was still at my house, wee hours of the morning, and I was getting calls from the chiefs and all, and they were like, we got to come probably pick you up, so how you want us to do this? And I was like, well, I have to get Alex straight, and I had to just get her down the street to my mom. And even at that point, getting out the house, like we couldn't see, that was Northwest Columbia, and even down the street from me, one of just the small bridges had, been overtaken with water, and I think a car or something had gone into that small little pond area, and so it was just very difficult, but I had to, get myself centered. And once I had her straight, I was good. I was like, okay, let's go. We gotta get this done. So calling our media partners to begin to get some reassurances to the public, because the 911 communication system was just being inundated with calls. And I think those are some of the things that, even though we had prepared, we couldn't have possibly been prepared for the magnitude and the volume of those who were in need and calling at once. And so the system was really just inundated with calls, and you knew people were seeking direction on, should I leave my house? Should I, if I do, where do I go? And those type things that we had just never experienced. So it really, too, which I'm sure we may talk about this, it became, after all was said and done, one of the things I'm most proud of now is that we took those lessons that we learned and actually put things into place. Now we have an actual emergency management director. That wasn't a position we had at the time at the City of Columbia. So Harry Tinsley is now that person. He was very involved then, but I was like, okay, we have to just formalize this, and we need to, all the time, every day, you're putting things into place and practicing on those things and doing trainings all along, thinking ahead and being proactive for some of those things we learned, like, even though you have to lean into the county and the state, but do we have shelters already stood up in place, even if we never have to use them? So you can have clear information to tell individuals and citizens, families, because the not knowing, I think, is very challenging for people at a time of a crisis or an emergency.
So when you got into, I guess, the office or wherever they took you after you dropped your daughter off, I mean, what was it like? I mean, were you just go for days straight? Did you stay here? Did you go back home? I mean, what were some of the things that you maybe recall from that time?
Right. So at that time, our emergency operations center was at Lady Street, which was one of our facilities, but it was in the basement of Lady Street. Now we have a very state-of-the-art. There's another growing point that we are proud of since the flood, where we now have a real-time crime center, all the cameras up and everything. But at that point in time, I mean, it was definitely an efficient center, but we've grown it since then. But yes, that is where I was taken. But before I could even get there, though, coming down 26 and seeing the elevation of the water, over when you're going over the bridges, I was like, Chief, are you good? I was like literally riding with Chief Jenkins. He was like, yes, ma'am, we're good. Don't worry, we're going to get there. But he said, well, I got to make a couple stops on the way. And one of those stops, one of our firefighters at that time, that became a story, was they had kind of lost track of one of them, and it was down more in the Cross Hill area of town, like going down towards Garner's Ferry. And that whole intersection was overtaken with water. So I got to watch, our crews in rescue mode. They're like, you have to stay in the vehicle. The chief was like, I just need to check on this real quick, and then I'm going to get you to the EOC, but just stay right here. And so I was watching all this, and I'm like, okay, this is like really serious. This is much more than what, we would have ever imagined. So I had those moments of seeing our folks in action, and I really think it grounded me even more, because I knew I needed to be that leader for them to make sure they could do their jobs and continue to do them effectively, have the resources they needed, and things that I, just making sure they were fed and making sure that, we were communicating with our county counterparts and some of the surrounding Midlands areas. So when I got to the EOC, that's what we did. Sheriff Lott was there, Chief Holbrook was there, Chief Jenkins, and we just got around a table. And I remember vividly us being on like a landline with, like, I think the county administrator and some of their officials. And we just started literally talking about, okay, which shelter's open? What can we do to stand up another one? Do we need to open our parks? The answer was yes. I mean, we just started doing any and everything to try to get help to people, because at that point it was still a massive amount of citizens who were calling. And so we had, we were having to physically bring in 911 communicators because they couldn't drive from where they were located to get downtown to get to the EOC to work. And so fortunately, again, our staff had planned for that, to have stations set up in the EOC so that we could bring in backup for calls to be received. But it was sort of like all hands on deck. And no, I didn't get to go home. I ended up staying there.
You have dams failing, you have Garner's Ferry underwater, you think things might be calming down, then all of a sudden there's a breach on the canal. I mean, like, you had so many things going on. It just seems like
things going on, yes.
Could have been so much worse. It was bad, but it could have been so much
catastrophic, really, yeah. But we, I think it really did still come down to, because even like with Fort Jackson, we were communicating with them as well, because some of those were the dams closer to the fort that were breaching. It was almost like a domino effect, to your point. So it was a lot of communicative, partnerships going on where everybody could step in with their infrastructure for the fort or the county or the state. It was just everyone kind of pulling together. With the breach occurring, when would our water supply truly be compromised? And particularly with the downtown corridor, we have our level 1 trauma center at the hospital and the universities. And, it was a major concern. So we began to talk to our state partners about how could they assist. And that's when ultimately, with the Guard being able to deploy a helicopter to help with the sandbags and just begin to fill in the breach in the canal so that we would not get to that place where Columbia was without proper drinking water. But that was very unnerving. And, when we were first contemplating the prospects of that, I literally, my team always talks about this because I told them to take me up to, kind of look at what we were really dealing with. And I felt physically sick. Like the thought of that happening in our community. And, that was like the last thing we wanted to hold on to, that we are going to, and we did it. It was hard to have boil water advisories and all that, but we never lost the drinking water source. Again, learning experience that we needed to build in more contingencies going forward. And that until just recently, now with the federal government shut down, but we just, for the most part, recently got our final, our allocations of the funding to rebuild the canal, but build it back better. And that's really instrumental for, even though it taken 10 years and a lot of assistance by, our delegation, Congressman Clyburn and others, they have been very, instrumental, Senator Graham, and we're very thankful for them staying on it. But it just shows that the federal process to get things done, because you have all these regulatory agencies when it's an infrastructure system like a drinking water source. So you have FEMA and FERC and EPA. Yeah, you have to go through all the different acronyms to get to where you need to be.
And then kind of wrapping up too, that was 10 years ago. Last year was Helene. I was at your press conference when everyone was freaking out in the sense that this was going to happen again. I mean, obviously fresh fears and not unrealized fears too. So kind of walk through, why those fears should be put to rest when we see a big storm coming through. Kind of elaborate a little bit what we just talked about, that funding coming back.
Right. So we, I never hate to come across like we were even chastising the public at all during Helene, because we actually were anticipating that people would have those same fears. Anybody would. It's a trigger, from when you've experienced something like we all went through in 2015. At the same time, we always want to make sure people are getting accurate information and not, creating a rush to judgment or a stir that could then cause other issues. So fast forward to 10 years now, and social media platforms are so much more, available and utilized. And so we've tried to really stand up our ways we communicate. And so when that was happening with Helene and individuals were concerned, we started putting out the information about, these are the things that we've done since 2015. These are some of the things that are still underway and pending with the funding that we're awaiting. And that even with that, when we get to the final version of a redundancy with the canal being rebuilt and built back even better, even before we get to that, we've done these things in the meantime. So your water source is not at risk. It will look scary when you get this amount of rain coming down in a very short period of time, but rest assured, we would never put the public at risk of anything without letting you know ahead of time. So we never, even with Helene, and again, Clinton, those can give you the numbers, but we never hit that threshold. It was nothing like the 2015 flood. It just probably felt like it because it was a lot of rain at that event as well.
At the end of all this, I mean, the city is more resilient.
We're more resilient. We're more resilient, and we have made, staffing changes and infrastructure changes that should eliminate the fear that the public experienced at that point in time. Yeah, we've learned a lot from that event.
Rob Godfrey was serving as Governor Nikki Haley's Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications at the time of the flood, which came during a tumultuous year for our state and the first year of Haley's second term. I spoke with him about the disaster, and he started off by recalling Haley's message of warning before the disaster hit.
They understand the risk of a hurricane coming from the ocean, and up the coast, and the need to evacuate. But it's harder to get people to understand, hey, this could be an unprecedented rain event. Get ready. And I remember waking up that morning hearing the rains. I mean, it awoke our dogs, and thinking, what in the world could be going on? Because I just looked out the window and saw water rushing downhill down the street, and I thought, holy smokes, this is as bad as people forecast. And that's actually a real credit to the folks who work out at the Emergency Response Center, including Kim Stinson, and including his team, and including the folks at the National Weather Service, who I think predicted this thing, did so well and allowed people to the extent that they would to brace for it, which I always think ultimately saves lives. And so preparing for it was something that the governor did not take lightly when she saw what was coming. And it got her ready and focused and in the posture to do everything she needed to do once we got to the recovery mode.
And you were there. I mean, you guys were operating out of the Emergency Management Division, the Emergency Operations Center, for so long. You flew around in Black Hawk helicopters surveying that damage. For you personally, for her, what was it like to see that aerial view of what was happening to our state at that time?
Sure. I think it was as breathtaking as it was heartbreaking to see the kind of damage that was inflicted on the people of the state. This was already a year that emotionally had taken its toll on South Carolina. That summer, we'd seen things like the shooting of Walter Scott, the shooting at Mother Emanuel Church. I mean, that literally, just weeks before, months before, and, to follow that up with a natural disaster, the likes of which, no one had ever seen or likely will ever see, in this lifetime, was jolting. Not only did we see it when we went to the far throes of the state or down to the coast, as it's customary to seeing when you tour hurricane damage, but it was flooding that ravaged the Midlands, mm-hmm. and that you could see close to home. So I think that it, like I said, it was heartbreaking. I think that it instilled resolve in the governor to begin doing everything she can to get people what they need and to start helping the state recover from this, because it had an economic impact. Mm-hmm. It had an impact on the lives that it took, and it had an impact on the way people lived and the houses that were swept away. I mean, it was breathtaking in its depth and breadth and its devastation.
And it seems like it didn't stop. The rain was going for so long. Then you had dams breaking. Then you had the water supply being under threat here in Columbia. Then you had stuff happening in the PD with, dams breaking there too, things being swept away. Here in Columbia, areas that you wouldn't think would flood were underwater. It just seemed like it was nonstop. You were at the EOC for 2 weeks straight. I mean, what were those days like, having to catch basically falling knives, essentially? Yes,
the days were very long, and they were grueling, as they are during natural disasters at the Emergency Operations Center. This was particularly difficult and particularly hard because, as you said, it was so many different, disasters that followed the initial disaster. And there are two, I think, groups that I think deserve real credit for how they helped respond and help the governor respond. First is her cabinet, obviously. Each of those cabinet members, including people like Transportation Secretary Christy Hall, whose star shone through, they deserve such great credit for the way they kept the governor informed, for the way they kept the governor ready to respond, for the ways that they, in an innovative and adaptive and in a quick way, responded to this. And I think also we have to give credit to, and obviously all of the folks at the Emergency Operations Center who always do an extraordinary job under these circumstances, and that includes Kim Stinson. But I think federal partners were important to the recovery effort too. There's just so much partisan rancor these days that we have to remember this was a governor who was working with a president of the opposite party, cabinet members and emergency management officials who were appointed by a president of another party, and people cooperated because they understood the stakes, and the stakes were people's lives, people's livelihoods, and where they lived. And so that was one of the things I took away from the 1,000-year flood, that when government gets together and works together with a common goal of doing what's right by the people, it's a great thing. It's a great thing. It's a core function of government, and we should not lose sight of ultimately what the 1,000-year flood taught us when we have all of the dysfunction going on around us.
You can find this report as well as SCETV's special Weathering the Flood on youtube.com/South Carolina ETV. For South Carolina ETV, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.